You really have to wonder whether artists actually do listen to critics most of the time. Why would they do that to themselves? And it must be impossible if they do listen to reviews not to respond. After all, this is someone with no investment and sometimes no experience of actually making music, tearing down work that probably took a long time to make. Sending a cheeky reply to call them a dick would be so easy. And it's something some artists have done, albeit in song form, because some truly incredible songs have been spawned from that exact situation. Words can hurt, and even the biggest artists aren't above throwing them back in critics' faces. I am Kirsten from WhatCulture Music, and these are 8 great songs that said F you to the critics. Number 8, Don't Bother Me by the Beatles. Although George Harrison would rather you forgot all about the very first song he wrote for the Beatles, he even went so far to say it might not even be a song at all, there is every reason to appreciate Don't Bother Me from the Beatles. For starters, it's the track that proved to Harrison's many haters in the press that he was every bit as capable of writing songs as John and Paul. Don't Bother Me was an exercise Harrison had to do, lest he continue his role alongside Ringo as one of the not so important members of the band. Ringo would try to prove his songwriting credentials much later with less appreciable results. It got the critical monkey off his back, so to speak, and it rightly shut up the music journalists who questioned his creative aptitude. Those same journalists would continue to eat crow for many years to come, as Harrison wrote some of the most important songs, including Here Comes the Sun and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Number 7, Still Dre by Dr.Dre. It had been 7 years since Dr. Dre produced a solo album, and the streets were buzzing with doubts as to whether or not the former member of NWA still had it in him. Was Dre still a legit rapper, or had he moved into the shadows for good? It was a reasonable question, especially since hip-hop tends to be a young man's game and Dre was entering his mid-30s at the time. But according to Dre, that was all fuel for the fire to cut another album. How would he respond? By pairing up with Snoop Dogg once again for 2001's Still Dre, announcing to the world that this wasn't his return to rap, but that he'd never left in the first place. He was still representing with the gangsters all across the world. He rapped about his prominence as a producer, name-checking his work with Eminem, who had just released the mega-selling Slim Shady LP, and he did so over the top of one of the most legendary beats in the history of rap music. Number 6, Your Early Stuff by the Pet Shop Boys. It's the number one criticism of bands who have suddenly made it big. Sure, the new album is fine, but I much prefer their early stuff. That phase is the quickest way for music snobs to assert their hipster credibility. As with any band that's been going around for 3 decades without reaching the Rolling Stones level of iconic status, the Pet Shop Boys were no stranger to that phase. By the time 2012 rolled around, they were still tied up to the hits of their first albums. Everything after that was considered, as one might guess, fine, but not as good as their early stuff. The band claims that they heard that from nearly everyone they met, and so they wrote Your Early Stuff, a song that digs into the idea of a musician's initial releases being the holy grail of their discography. Number 5, Survivor by Destiny's Child. Most of us remember Destiny's Child as a 3-piece that included Beyoncé Knowles and those other 2 girls who I'm absolutely positive had names, but that's about the extent of my knowledge on the subject. But back when they hit the scene with No No No, there were actually 4 members in the group, but due to rising tensions with management, Latavia Robertson and LaToya Luckett were ousted from the lineup and replaced with 2 new members. 5 months after that, however, one of those new members, Farrah Franklin, left the group. The whole situation was, as critics rightly pointed out, not entirely unlike a popular reality game show of the time. Which group member would be the next to be cast off the island? Many people assumed this was bound to be a constantly rotating cast. The remaining 3 members took umbrage with this notion and decided to sling it back in everyone's faces, co-opting the criticism by releasing one of their biggest selling hits, Survivor. Beyoncé claims the song was a pivotal moment in their careers, saying they had to write them out of negativity, and the process only bolstered confidence within the group. Number 4, You Are So Wild by Boy George. Back in the 80s, Boy George was an incredibly hot commodity as part of English band Culture Club, but he also branched out into a solo career at a time when music journalists were trying to outdo each other's savage review, adding more and more venom to their words. So naturally, melody maker journalist John Wilde went after one of George's singles saying, "I'd rather have my bollocks nailed to the wall in a nightclub than listen to this drivel." In all likelihood, Wilde only disliked the track a little, but he just had to go for the throat, you know, to keep his journalistic integrity. George responded in kind, sending a typed poem back to Wilde that completely tore the reviewer a new one. He also turned that little love letter into a B-side called "You Are So Wild." Get it? Wild? Like, wild? Hey, I never said it was a subtle comeback. At concerts, George would repeatedly introduce the song by saying, "This is for that scumbag at Melody Maker." So again, not the most covert attack. Apparently Wilde was a good sport about it though, only lamenting that he was offended it wasn't a proper A-side. Number 3, Bring the Noise by Public Enemy. It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back wasn't just the name of Public Enemy's sophomore album, it was a rallying cry for the rap group who felt that touchy music journalists and ignorant politicians were part of the millions of motherfuckers stopping them from getting what we need to get. Chuck D wasn't having that, and he responded with his group's defining anthem, Bring the Noise. The song focused on the common attack that Public Enemy didn't make music, they just made noise. Talking to the Rolling Stone about the song's importance, Chuck D said, "If they're calling my music noise, if they're saying that I'm really getting out of character being a black person in America, then fine, I'm bringing more noise." Of course, anyone moderately versed in rap history knows that the Public Enemy, one of the most legendary groups of any genre, the ambassadors of noise, is absurd. Fortunately, those critics existed at the time though, because they unknowingly helped fuel one of the most influential acts of all time. Number 2, Garageland by The Clash. The Clash are arguably the most important band in the punk movement, with their immensely popular album London Calling helping to give their genre legitimacy among serious rock critics. Ironically though, it was one critic's immediate dismissal of the band that stirred up the creative ire of Joe Strummer and helped propel them into widespread acclaim. When reviewing one of the band's early gigs, NME critic Charles Shaar Murray called The Clash the sort of garage band who should be speedily returned to the garage, preferably with the engine running. Translation: go kill yourselves. The criticism wasn't entirely unfounded. They were pretty crude back then, and less in the typical punk is supposed to sound raw way and more in the we truly have no goddamn idea what we're doing way. Naturally, Joe Strummer took Murray's comments to heart, as one does when someone is told to commit suicide by someone with significant readership, and would frequently lash out at critics in interviews that followed. Though Strummer obviously thought it was a bit harsh, he also had a begrudging respect for the critic being so straightforward. He said what he meant, but so did we. Garageland leads off with a simple, direct rebuttal. Back in the garage with my bullshit detector, carbon monoxide making sure it's effective. It goes on to lambast the expectations of what made a legitimate rock band, and short of calling him out by name, Strummer was making sure that he got the message. Curiously though, Murray would proclaim The Clash the greatest rock band in the world just 2 years later. Number 1, Money, Power, Glory by Lana Del Rey. To say that Lana Del Rey was not liked when 2012's Born to Die and uber popular single Video Games propelled her to the top of the indie music scene would be a gross understatement. She was straight up hated by pretty much everybody. It was hard for someone so young and so universally loathed to find their footing, and Del Rey would habitually find herself in the middle of attacks coming from all sides. Her career suffered because she didn't know what exactly she was doing wrong. So for 2014's Ultra Violence, she decided to just go with the hate, embracing claims that she was only in it for the money and had no creative aspirations to speak of. Embracing a Carl Jung quote that asserts what others think of you will inevitably become a facet of your psyche, wanted or not. Del Rey released the scathing Money, Power, Glory, which posited basically, you bet your ass I'm gonna take the money and fame. I want money, power and glory. I want money and all your power, all your glory, hallelujah. I want to take you for all that you got, hallelujah. I'm gonna take them for all that they got. She admits that she was positively bitter when she recorded it. Duh. And had decided that if she wasn't going to get the critical acclaim, she was absolutely going to reap the other benefits. And there we go, those are 10 great songs that said f you to the critics. Which other critic baiting songs belong on this list? Share your picks down below in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. But for now, I have been Kirsten from WhatCulture, and I will see you in the next video.